Good morning, I'm Adam Sexton. In an election year, we tend to spend our summers here on Close Up with the candidates, and today we're sitting down with Congressman Chris Pappas as he tries to maintain his hold on a competitive seat. Congressman, thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you, Adam.
So the Republican field arrayed against you is now set. The filing period is closed. We had a surprise entrant at the end here from your hometown of Manchester, the Queen City, Alderman Joe Kelly Levasseur. He had an interesting comment when he filed. He said, quote, "I've always felt if you're going to beat Chris Pappas, you need a Manchester guy to do it." What are your thoughts about that?
Well, look, I've got 75 cities and towns in the 1st Congressional District. We work hard to reach people in each and every one of those communities. And this isn't about any of the personalities in this race. This is truly about who understands New Hampshire, who's going to put the needs of our state first. That's the work that I've been doing, trying to reach across the aisle, whether the issue is immigration, whether it's lowering the cost of prescription drugs, addressing the opioid and mental health epidemic that our state faces. They need someone who's going to fight for New Hampshire first. So we've got to get past the petty partisanship that we see far too much of in Washington, D.C. I'm the kind of candidate that can cut through it, has relationships on both sides of the aisle. And to me, this is about public service for the state that has given me so many opportunities in life. Would be honored to come back for another 2 years as the representative from this district.
When you hear Joe Kelly say Trump needs allies in Congress, what do you think?
Well, this shouldn't be about any one president or any one political party. It's about the people of New Hampshire first. And to see the way that Republicans are so eagerly willing to give away their agency to Donald Trump. We're already seeing it in this Congress before the election results are even known. Donald Trump has been able to prevent bipartisan legislation from coming to the floor that would address the immigration and border security crisis. He was cheering for the government to be shut down by MAGA Republicans in the House, even wanted them to not cut a deal with Democrats to prevent a default on our debt. So this is about good governance. It's about what's right for New Hampshire and our country. And we should be making sure that we have leaders that are going to unify us around a set of common values and to work with a common purpose. That's the work that I've been trying to do in Washington. We can't do that if we're electing extremists to Congress or folks that are just focused on carrying the water for the President of the United States.
You talk about leadership. Are you confident in the re-election campaign of President Joe Biden?
Well, look, he's got more work to do, and I think we see that borne out in the surveys here in New Hampshire and across the country. So he's got to get out there and campaign hard. But I think when you look at the issues that are at stake this year, how we're going to work together to lower costs for the American people, how we're going to protect personal freedoms, including a woman's right to choose in the wake of the Dobbs decision, which is dangerous for the health and safety of women across our country, how we're going to make sure our democracy can translate the will of the voters into progress. I think it's going to be a clear-cut answer from the voters of New Hampshire this fall, but he's got to get out there and earn it just like any other candidate on the ballot.
You mentioned the Dobbs decision. That was obviously a driver of the outcome in November 2022. Are you and other Democrats counting on the outrage from Dobbs lasting through another election cycle here to November 2024?
Well, it's nothing we're calculating on. It's something that is real amongst the people of New Hampshire. It's one of the top issues I hear about as we're out and about across the state. People that are sharing really personal stories with me about their own family experiences, what they're hearing from friends and family members in other parts of the country. We are seeing a race to the bottom in terms of onerous laws that are being passed state by state that are targeting women. And we're also seeing action within Congress, including just last week when Republicans pushed amendments to try to restrict the ability of women service members from accessing reproductive care. So this is both a state and a national battle, and the best way we can work to address this is to elect pro-choice representatives to Congress. I'm the only one in this race that will fight to defend a woman's right to choose, and we'll work to reinstate Roe v. Wade, which was the precedent for 50 years, guided abortion policy in this country. We should be reestablishing that as the law of the land. I'll do that. My opponents won't.
Yeah, you know, obviously there were debate over restrictions on abortion, and Democrats now support much more broadly abortion later in pregnancy. You know, and Republicans keep hitting you on this, and Democrats in general. I'm not sure I've ever heard a clear answer to the question, why does elective abortion need to be legal through the 3rd trimester when a fetus is viable?
Well, what I'm interested in is the standard of Roe v. Wade, and that's a standard that protected access to abortion in the early trimesters and allowed for restrictions that were reasonable later on. But I think what we're seeing happen right now as state legislators are rushing to pass laws, including here in New Hampshire, where the law had to be revised, is that legislators and government officials don't know what's best. These decisions are best left to women, to families, to doctors, to be able to decide what's best for them. There are circumstances that policymakers just can't grapple with or understand in terms of people's lived experiences. And so this is truly about freedom. It's about giving people the power to chart their own destiny, to decide when and how they're going to have a family. And really, government shouldn't be meddling in that decision. And we should start by reestablishing Roe v. Wade as the precedent.
Your offices here in New Hampshire have been targeted by anti-Israel protesters. Is there anything they're saying that you agree with?
Well, look, I think people that are calling for peace, are calling to respect the dignity of all human beings, are people that we should be, thinking about in terms of the debate about how we bring things to a peaceful resolution with respect to the war in Gaza. That can't happen unless the 120 hostages are returned home to their families in Israel, unless there are security guarantees for Israel, unless we know that Hamas won't undertake this kind of attack again. We've got to make sure that their operations are degraded, that they're destroyed, that they no longer can rule Gaza. So there's a framework on the table that Hamas could accept today to release the hostages and to make sure that there are the security guarantees that Israel needs. They've yet to accept that. I would hope that we would see them moving in that direction to accept that permanent ceasefire, which would allow for the reestablishment of some order within Gaza and potentially the next steps toward a peaceful resolution to the longstanding conflict between the Palestinian people and Israel. That's where we've got to go. That's got to be a central policy in terms of the United States foreign policy in the area, and we'll continue to push that. But right now, we're listening to people of diverse points of view on this. People are passionate, that believe a variety of different things. I've been trying to listen and learn and hear people out, but my support for the state of Israel and for a peaceful resolution is something that will continue to guide my action in Congress.
You know, at the peak of the campus protests, you signed on to a letter to Columbia University that said, quote, "For the past week, this encampment has been the breeding ground for anti-Semitic attacks on Jewish students, including hate speech, harassment, intimidation, even threats of violence. Lots of college grads apply to work on Capitol Hill. If an applicant had participated in this encampment, in these protests, and still was an unapologetic anti-Zionist, would you hire them in your office?"
Well, there's no place for anti-Semitism, and we saw the campus protests, particularly at Columbia, become a breeding ground for anti-Semitic speech. They were blocking students from being able to get to class. I think classes were actually shut down. They created an incredibly unsafe situation. And so we do need to see the kind of moral clarity from academic leaders, from leaders in the political space on the issue of whether or not anti-Semitism is going to be permitted in our communities. That being said, we've got some qualified, really capable young people that work in our office. We've had people with a long-standing tenure, interns that are coming off college campuses, some from New Hampshire that are working down in Washington. They're the lifeblood of our office, and we're going to continue to make sure that we have the best qualified people working for us.
June is Pride Month. I'm sure you've taken an interest in some of the bills that are heading to Governor Chris Sununu's desk. You've lived through and helped create a lot of change for the LGBTQ community here in New Hampshire in your years. In your opinion, if certain protections for transgender individuals are rolled back by legislation heading to the governor, if he signs it, do you think certain gay rights are next?
Well, we have to be conscious of that, especially in the wake of the Dobbs decision, where Clarence Thomas helped lay out a roadmap for future attacks on the right to privacy that include access to contraception and the same-sex marriage decision in Obergefell. And so we have to make sure that we are moving forward as a country and including everyone in the destiny of this nation. We do better as Americans when each and every person can live their truth, has the support of the law and the support of their community. And so that's why we're working on passing the Equality Act, which would add LGBTQ Americans to our nation's civil rights, non-discrimination statutes. That's an important change that we can make. I believe we can get it done in a bipartisan fashion in the next Congress if we have the right leadership.
On immigration, obviously the federal government is paying millions of dollars to be able to house and feed and provide medical care for the undocumented migrants that cross the border illegally. Do you find it problematic if that care is superior to that being provided to U.S. citizens, say, in county jails?
Well, I think Americans need to have access to the health care that they need. It should be a right and not a privilege. And so that's something that I've worked to expand in terms of, the state's Medicaid program, in terms of legislation that I've supported in Congress. But certainly, we need to make sure that American citizens' needs are being met, while we also look at the issue of how we secure the border and have immigration reform long term. We've seen the president take several steps recently on executive orders, and I think no president can solve this problem on their own. We need Congress to act in a bipartisan fashion to do immigration reform in a comprehensive fashion. I'm supporting legislation to do that, and it's time we stop playing politics with it and actually solve the problem.
All right, Congressman Pappas, thanks for your time on Close Up. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Adam.